The next session is sponsored by DTE Energy. Please welcome Lieutenant Governor of the State of Michigan, Garlin Gilchrist II, joined by Executive Advisor at BridgeDetroit and the host of Detroit Today and American Black Journal, Stephen Henderson.
All right. LG, good to see you here.
Good to see you. Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everybody.
To you too. So I want to talk to you, of course, about the state and its role in Detroit, and especially in downtown Detroit. But I want to start with you as a Detroiter. I mean, you're a native Detroiter. We once upon a time lived in the same neighborhood as children. We've seen downtown change a number of times, right? I think for people who haven't been here that long, some of the things that we're experiencing now are new. For us, this is the way it's always been. There's always been a challenge. There's always been something that we try to do. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But I want to get your sense of downtown now as somebody who grew up here but who still lives here. Where are we? Are we in a better place? And what are the challenges we have?
Well, first of all, I really appreciate being back here with the Chamber at the policy conference. And Governor Gretchen Whitmer and I are excited about the state of Michigan and what we can do for the next 4 years. And that always is grounded in what's happening in Detroit. This city is the most important city for our economy, for our culture, and helps to really set the trajectory for our future. And so thinking about downtown Detroit is very personal to me. In my childhood, spent the first half of my childhood living just east of downtown in Elmwood Park. And my father worked downtown, so I remember coming in with him so often, going to the Grand Prix downtown. Super excited to have that going back through the streets of downtown Detroit. Remember going to Trappers Alley and thinking riding a people mover was the most awesome thing ever to go get off at Trappers Alley.
It's an amusement park ride for kids. Right?
So I think how things have evolved, what's become clear is that it's important that every part of our city can advance together. And you can't think of an amazing city experience without having an amazing downtown experience. And that experience must then be able to create value for others who live in other parts of the city. And I think we're beginning to really see elements of that take shape. And so the state has been very aggressive in being partners with many of the people in this room, many people who are part of this organization, to make sure that those investments are targeted, that we are building on everything from transportation infrastructure with the ongoing investment that the state is committed to in the Q line, to amazing event spaces and continuing to support those with the support we've done of Huntington Place, to building up the technology ecosystem and the amazing, whether it's incumbent technology companies or startups that are driven by people with ideas, especially in the software space where I come from. Mm-hmm. We're excited to see Detroit being named as the #1 startup ecosystem for emerging companies. And adding that, yes, adding to the sense that Detroit is the place for a person with an idea to come and thrive and grow it and be successful. That's always been true of our city, and if it's true downtown, it can be true everywhere.
Yeah. So let's talk some about what's about to happen in Lansing. We've got Democrats in control of the legislature and the governorship for the first time since, I don't know that you were born the last time that was true. I was young. I don't think you were even around yet. The expectations, I think, for Detroiters are high because of that, and they should be. The state hasn't done right by the city or by downtown, I think, for a really long time. So what do you think is possible in terms of difference and enhancement in terms of that relationship between the state and the city? And as you point out, not just investing in downtown, but making sure that those investments lift neighborhoods and lift the people who live here, most of whom who don't live downtown.
I started with the governor in mind's excitement on purpose, and that is in part because of the opportunity that we have. Yes, this is the first time in 40 years that Democrats have been in the majority in both chambers of the legislature and hold the governor and lieutenant governor's offices. And to put that in perspective, yes, I was 3 months old last time that happened.
I was
I don't
12.
remember that.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, though, are thinking about and trying to understand what is possible in this moment. How can we take advantage of this opportunity that the voters of the state of Michigan and the voters of Detroit largely supported have given us? And I think we should start by saying with the fact that Detroit is better represented in state leadership than it ever has been. Certainly, I'm a Detroiter, serving as Lieutenant Governor alongside Governor Gretchen Whitmer. House Speaker Joe Tate is a Detroiter. And so the city, this is a moment for the city to recognize that leadership in Lansing is not only responsive, but that Detroiters are literally in place.
Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about what our priorities are, they're the same priorities that Governor Whitmer and I have been talking about and making progress on for the last 4 years. And I think it really starts with how are we laying the foundation for the future in the city of Detroit. The way that we've invested in public education, I believe, is laying a solid groundwork for transformational educational experiences. Our administration has worked with a Republican legislature for the last 4 years to put more money into your schools, into Detroit public schools, the schools that my children attend 4th grade in right now, than ever in the history of education in the state of Michigan. And doing so equitably, positioning young people to realize whatever dreams that they have are available to them in the economy that we are building and growing in the state of Michigan. We're going to continue to be committed to that educational investment. Even going a step further by ensuring that kids have access to individualized learning experiences, because a lot of kids might need a little bit more support coming out of COVID, or just might need people to meet them where they are in a more aggressive way. And we're very excited to be bringing that to reality here over the next 4 years. We also know that we have to continue to grow our economy in an inclusive and equitable way. That means people understanding that if they have ideas and want to be entrepreneurs, that we see them as potentially Michigan and Detroit entrepreneurs and want to support their success and growth. We've had record-breaking economic activity and economic development and traction happening in the state of Michigan just in the last several years. Historic investments from everybody from General Motors to battery plants to people doing all sorts of manufacturing, to Fermata to Michigan Central Station and everywhere in between. And we're going to continue to make sure that Detroiters have access to those jobs, that Detroiters are going to be able to get the skills training, the higher education that will be affordable and available to them in a way that it never has been before, whether it's community college, or it's the fact that 3 out of 4 Detroit high school students will qualify for a Michigan Achievement Scholarship to make 4-year college more affordable than it's ever been in the history of the state of Michigan. We're very excited about what that represents, and we think that future will be good for Detroit, be good for downtown, but more importantly, will be good for Michigan's role in leadership in the country.
Yeah. You mentioned education, and for a while now, there's a report that's kind of been gathering dust in Lansing that talks about education funding from an equity standpoint. It really dove into what does each district actually need to educate the population it has, as opposed to thinking about just heads, right? How many people, how many students do you have? And we haven't had any progress. We haven't been able to get any traction with that report, and thinking about, does a district like Detroit, because of its challenges, need more funding than wealthier districts that can raise it locally? Is that something that can get some traction now because of the political alignment?
Well, the research has been clear that when you have families who are fighting persistent poverty every day, we need to invest more in their education, not less. And the way that we have structured the increased educational funding over the last few years has been directly responsive to that need. And we will continue to build on that foundation to do so. Now, there's continued research and thinking about how can we maybe revisit how education funding is structured overall in the state of Michigan. We're operating under a system that was put into place in the mid-90s, and that has led to some very, very deep inequities. And we need to address that. And I think it's something that our administration, in partnership with this legislature and in partnership with a number of allies and stakeholders in the business community and higher education and in K-12 education, are really eager to see if this is something that we can get right. So we have a big opportunity, and we're welcoming a conversation about, again, how we can approach educating our young people in the most effective way, because that will determine the trajectory of our city's future and ultimately the trajectory of the state's economy.
When you think of other things that that you need to have working, to make the city thrive, to make Detroiters thrive, education is huge on that list, but also workforce development. And you guys have been doing some work from the state level, augmenting the things that we're already doing locally to grow that.
That's right. So when I think about skills training and workforce development, let's start with a goal that Governor Whitmer and I set back in 2019, something called 60 by 30. That goal means that by the year 2030, we hope to have at least 60% of Michigan's adults having either a college degree, a community college degree, a professional training or certification, a skill that they have a credential for that can translate into what they can into work. And we have formed a program called Michigan Reconnect. It was passed on a bipartisan basis that provides tuition-free pathways to community college and skills training. And we're excited to say that when we fully funded that program in 2020, we started at 45% of Michiganders that had this kind of credential. We had to make up 15%. Well, just in 2 years, we made up almost 5% of that gap. We are ahead of schedule and want to continue full steam ahead to get to that credentialed state. Because when we're talking to businesses that are growing in Michigan, that are looking to come to Michigan, the number one question they ask for is, can we find enough talented Michiganders? Can we find people who have the skills that we need to grow our business? And in a place where we have such great engineering talent that's already credentialed, in a place that we have so many young people who are ambitious, we want to make sure they can carry the card of someone who can do whatever job and whatever challenge we put in front of them. And we're going to build on Michigan Reconnect. Just last year in the budget, we funded additional wraparound services so that people actually, once they were receiving these funds and getting the education, but maybe something came up in life, maybe your car broke down, maybe you needed additional childcare help. We funded the wraparound services so that money that you needed could fill that gap so that would not put you away from your path of actually completing your education. We want to double down on that. We also have worked with many in this room on a program called Going Pro, which supports employer-based, on-the-job training programs that provide industry-recognized credentials that are transferable. And we really appreciate how many companies are participating on that to give the people on their teams the skills they need to continue and grow their careers. So making sure that Michiganders and Detroiters are positioned to take advantage of the jobs that we're creating, whether it's the 30,000 auto jobs, the increasing jobs in the technology sector, our services sector and healthcare is booming here in Southeast Michigan. We want to make sure that Michiganders are prepared to take those jobs.
And 60 by 30, put in perspective how much of a stretch goal that is. Talk about where we started.
We started at 45%, needing to get to 60% in just over 10 years. And again, we've made significant progress. We've almost made up 5% of that in 2 years. And I certainly like exceeding expectations. We would love to blow through that. We want to make sure that, again, more Michiganders are ready so that there will be no company that has a question whether they can find who they need to grow and prosper here in the state of Michigan. They can certainly do that.
Yeah. Transit also is one of the things that's confounded us for my entire life here in Southeast Michigan, and Detroit is the center of that. I mean, we just can't get that straight. We do have some things in place, some infrastructure that we could take advantage of. A lot of that is about local choice, but talk about the state's role in trying to make sure that people can get where they need to go. That's a key to both education and job opportunities.
Well, certainly, I'll just share my story personally. So I am probably the first person in a position at my level who lived as an adult primary transit rider. Before I took office as lieutenant governor, I was taking the bus to work between Detroit and Ann Arbor. Like literally, when the governor asked me to be her running mate, they had to come pick me up because I didn't drive to work. And so I have seen personally with my family the seams of our existing transit infrastructure. But in seeing those seams, I also see the opportunity. We need to give people options about how they realize their mobility needs and goals. And the state of Michigan, over the last several years, we have invested billions of dollars of state resources into strengthening our transportation systems. And we want to continue to build on that investment, and we want to work with local governments and local partners to actually realize the opportunity we have to build a transit infrastructure that works for everyone, that connects people to jobs in the city and outside of the city, that connects people to healthcare opportunities that will improve their health outcomes as we build out that infrastructure, that makes sure that people have access to flexible educational experiences, and that frankly people can just go via transit someplace to have fun. That should be part of a city experience, part of a downtown experience. That's part of the experience that people expect when we are recruiting people to move to Michigan and move to Detroit, whether that's from the suburbs or from another state. And so we want to continue to build on those investments. And that's something that I personally will be engaged in as a transit rider and want to see that be successful, because a healthy transit system supports everyone of all income levels, of all life experiences. It's something that can bring us actually together for better connected communities.
Is there opportunity for the state to play an even bigger role in local transit? As I said, it's been largely left to communities and regional governments to try to do that. Is there something the state can do to jumpstart, the Regional Transit Authority or some other entity to make this go faster?
I won't handicap a particular tactic, but the answer to your question is yes. Like, we certainly want to be at the table of conversation, and there are a lot of folks who need to work together to get that right. But we've seen this happen in work in places where it may not have been possible before. We think we can make it possible here.
Yeah. We don't talk enough, I think, about housing and the opportunities for housing and the gap that exists in housing in the city. If you think about the opportunity to kind of jumpstart downtown again, a lot of people are talking about, well, let's build more housing downtown. But of course, that implicates all these other issues that we have with housing in the city and affordability, the fact that so many people don't feel like it's accessible. Talk about the state's approach to those things.
So last year, the state of Michigan released its first ever, frankly, statewide housing plan. And the anchor value there is that housing needs to be more affordable and we need more of it. That is true in every city in Michigan, and in some ways Detroit, while it has its own flavor of it, it's a problem that we share. I have led a tour twice over across the state of Michigan called Thriving Cities, both of them starting in Detroit, where we talked about the most important issues facing cities in our state, and affordable housing was the one that came up the most in the most places, including here in the city of Detroit. As part of that statewide housing plan, we're looking to both diversify the types of housing we can build and that the state can support, and also, frankly, diversify the types of developers who are participating in those build-outs, because different sorts of developers with different business models and different experiences are going to build a more diverse array of housing options in many more parts of the city that otherwise some may not be looking at investing in. And so we think that all needs to be part of the equation. The state is going to put up historic resources to make it happen. Just last year, as part of our Building Michigan Together plan, we supported and we invested $100 million in our state's community development fund. It's our state's housing trust fund. The housing trust fund exists specifically to invest in affordable housing. And the investment's going to lead to a leverage of about $400 million more in private investment. It's going to lead to, again, a more diverse array of housing stock being built and developed. It's going to be tens of thousands of new units. And we think that's going to help jumpstart. But we also know that affordable housing is bigger than a $100 million problem. It's bigger than a $500 million problem. And we need to find an ongoing way to support, via the state, continued investment in affordable housing. I'll give you a comparison. I don't like Ohio. But I'll give you an Ohio comparison. And it's that the state of Ohio invests $60 million a year in their housing trust fund. We put a $100 million payment into ours, and that's important progress, the most that's ever been in that fund since it was created decades ago. Mm-hmm. But we need to find a way to continue to support this kind of work in an ongoing way, and that's the kind of commitment that we're looking to try to understand.
Yeah. Speaking of money, I mean, there's a lot of money in Lansing right now, more than we've had in recent years. Some of it is one-time money and circumstantial. But, the state's doing pretty well with revenue as well. I want to talk a little about revenue and the way it relates to cities. For the longest time, We have been on a downward slope, I think, in terms of investment in cities through things like revenue sharing. A lot of the circumstances that led to the bankruptcy here in Detroit had to do with that state withdrawal of investment. And there hasn't been this kind of comprehensive conversation in Lansing about how should we fund cities? How should we make sure they have the money they have or they need? And are there things that we don't do or are not doing that we could think about doing? Is revenue sharing maybe outdated? Should we be coming up with other ways for cities to raise money? I wonder what that conversation might look like now that you have Democrats in charge as opposed to, a split of power.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So let's start with the existing framework, and then we can talk about, what a potential framework could look like in the future. So constitutional and statutory revenue sharing is the law. And the fact that that had been undercut by previous administrations and previous legislatures is a problem, and it is unfair to the city of Detroit. It's unfair to cities and municipalities across Michigan, and frankly, that was something that our predecessors, Republican leadership, those were choices that they made. In every budget that Governor Whitmer and I put forward to the legislature, we proposed significant increases in revenue sharing on an ongoing basis and on a one-time basis, and we saw Republican legislatures cut that line enthusiastically. So we look forward to being able to put forward budgets with a Democratic legislature that will support the fact that when we talk about investing in revenue sharing, that is investing in public safety, that is investing in fire safety, investing in emergency responders, investing in well-supported public sector employees who are doing service to the community. And that helps cities have the resources to do the things they need to do to take care of their residents. So we are looking forward to actually fully meeting the commitments of revenue sharing on a constitutional and statutory basis. And I think that needs to be a baseline. And frankly, it's sad that past governments have not.
I'm trying to think, when's the last time that was true?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, it's been years, right?
It's a great question. But, going forward, again, I think that, let me just take a step back, because a lot of your questions, I think, have the same flavor. And they're about what's possible and what can we be thinking about differently. And I want all of us to think about that. All of us to think about, what can we do more of? How can we go further? In my speech at the swearing in, that was the challenge that I put to myself and others, especially us public servants, like what can we do to do and deliver more? And so I think on this question of, what it means to be a well-supported city in Michigan, we have a chance to define that in a new way for a new generation. And so there are a lot of elements to that. Certainly revenue and revenue sharing is a part of it, but also renewed partnership is a part of it. The conversation between cities and state government can be less adversarial than it has been in a long time. The conversation is one that I look forward to having. And, as a person, like I said, who lives in a city, who lives in this city, that conversation needs to be healthy for all of us to be successful.
Yeah. Are there, cities are really constrained in terms of their own revenue, right? What they can do, what they can't do. My friends at the Michigan Municipal League, I think, have been talking a long time about how antiquated that might be given the things that we see. What's the primary activity in downtown Detroit today? It's entertainment. There isn't a way for the city to capture a lot of that revenue. Should we be talking about that? Can we talk about that now?
Yeah, I think that many of the constraints, whether it's on how revenue like that could be captured on entertainment taxes, how revenue is constrained on how cities and municipalities can approach their road funding and other infrastructure investments, there have been shackles put on them for a long time. I think the important piece that's available to us now is just understanding that we can open up conversations that we haven't opened up a long time. And I think we need to have a lot of stakeholders at the table. There's a pretty diverse array of viewpoints around what the best way to proceed is, even if we have consensus on what the challenges and constraints are. But our approach to governing for the last 4 years has been one of looking to actually welcome and ultimately build that consensus. And that means inviting folks to the table. That's why we've worked, I think, so effectively, even on a bipartisan basis, for everything that we've had to do for the last 4 years. That attitude and approach is not going to stop. And so we're going to welcome city leaders and city stakeholders to the table to have a conversation about what it looks like to be a well-supported city, what kind of tools cities need to deliver for their residents in this state that is a collection of cities and communities. And I think that there are a lot of flexibility, so I don't want to handicap as to where that could ultimately land. But it's a conversation that we certainly welcome.
Okay. I've got you here. Your name has been mentioned along lots of others for the soon-to-be empty Senate seat in Washington. I wonder what you think about that.
I was wondering if you was going to ask me this question.
I was looking at the clock, making sure I left enough time for you to answer that question.
I mean, well, so where this conversation needs to start is the fact that Michigan has been amazingly served by Senator Debbie Stabenow. Like, amazingly served. She has defined the fact that people across the country and the world understand that Michigan is a place where we make and grow things. She has been an example and a mentor to pretty much every public servant currently serving in the state of Michigan, myself included. You know, I got to tell you, we came into this conversation today because I'm excited about the next 4 years with Governor Gretchen Whitmer and all the work that we can do, all the things that we can deliver. The fact that we have Democratic governance for the first time in my life, we have a chance to show that that makes a difference for people in a way that people can therefore think, you know what, this is something that we should continue to support because this is something that is stronger for our communities and for our economy. I didn't expect the senator to announce that she wasn't going to seek re-election, and so this is something certainly that my wife and I are thinking about because that has significant implications on our family. But what's important and what I am focused on is making sure that we can deliver for Michiganders right now using the tools that the voters of Michigan blessed me with in re-electing me as Lieutenant Governor alongside Gretchen Whitmer. And I'm going to do that to the highest and best of my ability.
I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that if you did seek that and if you were successful, you'd be the first African American to represent Michigan in the U.S. Senate. We've been breaking through these barriers, our whole lives, really, and think of how different government looks now than it did when we were kids. That's got to be part of what you're thinking. I mean, you broke that barrier at the lieutenant governor level. What would that mean for Michigan to be able to do that, to have that?
Well, I carry the responsibility of serving and being the first Black lieutenant governor. I take that very seriously. It is a deep, deep, deep honor, and I recognize that therefore how I govern and comport myself in this role has many implications for a lot of people, and they may look at me a little bit differently than other lieutenant governors in the past. And certainly I think whoever fills Senator Stabenow's shoes will have to think about that. And I know that I started earlier in this conversation talking about representation and how Detroit is better represented than it's ever been. Black folks are also represented at a higher level than we ever have been in Michigan as a result of that. We've never had a Black speaker. We've never had a Black lieutenant governor. For us to be aligned in the same party and sharing values, I think is a high leverage opportunity to deliver for our folks. So I certainly care deeply about representation of Black folks in the city, and certainly that would be an amazing thing if that was something that happened for the state of Michigan and the voters chose to do that.
Yeah. Okay, we're out of time. Thanks for being here.
Stephen, thank you so much. And everyone enjoy the conference. Thank you, DT, for supporting this and supporting this session.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.